If you ever wanted to know why no other Orthodox Christian community celebrates Slava, that's because it never was a Christian event. It's just that Serbs wouldn't give up the ritual, and the Christian church had to accept it as its own, despite its efforts to abandon the practice, showing just how much the church wanted it gone. Slava today is somewhat different from the original, but the essence is still there. As mentioned before, people often paid their dues to one cult more than others, and Slava was a once a year event when Serbs would pay respects to a deity. With acceptance of Christianity, that came to be the family saint. Many people say that Slava was set in place to remember one's ancestors and thank them for everything they did so you could be where you were, while others say Slava had nothing to do with the cult of ancestors or the deceased, as by nature Slava was a joyful event, contradictory to rituals related to the cult of ancestors. The latter also believed Slava was meant to celebrate the living, their luck to still be around, and ask the gods to watch over them for years to come. Not many Serbs were literate or even had time to write, so there are very few records of old Slava practices. What historians managed to collect was mostly from local stories and what they were told and taught. You might have guessed that customs, as well as names of everyday objects, varied from village to village, so please keep that in mind. The important elements were bread, smaller bread, even smaller bread, in some places one, in some three, a big candle, and a wooden cross. The bread, Slavski kolac, was the main star of the show. The head of the house, usually a man, and any guest that came by, usually a neighbor, would stand facing each other while holding the bread together with their both hands. They would raise it high 3 times, as the number 3 holds a special place in everything Serbian people do, to symbolize their wishes for how tall they want their wheat to grow. Then they would break the bread in half. Everyone present in the room would keep their eyes on the bread this entire time. It was important to perform this action no later than noon, as right after this, everyone would face east, or rather face the east wall where the wooden cross was hung. This symbolized turning to the sun, the supreme deity. Let me just quickly remind you that the wooden cross in question was a pagan idol every Serbian house apparently had before Christianity. It was most often made of oak, yellow mulberry, black hawthorn, or yew, then painted black. At this point, everyone thanks God, then hugs and kisses among themselves, wishing each other all the best. The smaller bread, called baba, or ljubinko, which roughly translates to kissy, and I love it, it's so cute, was used to hold a candle, so it was baked with a hole in the center. American donut, but make it holy. Anyone to enter the room would bend and plant a kiss on this tiny piece of bread put on the east side of the table. If they had more than one table, each would have a baba. And those even smaller breads, usually 1 or 3, liturgice, were just there, I guess. They were gifted to guests or given to children. With Christianity, the ritual was added on, so the head of the house, exclusively a man, would go to the church early morning on the day of Slava, carrying all those pieces of bread. Apparently, priests would usually keep half of everything people brought to the church, so the tiny pieces of bread were given to the priest instead. Today, priests don't take any of your food, obviously. The priest and the head of the house would perform a somewhat similar ritual, raising the bread high up 3 times and breaking it in half, with the exception of breaking the bread twice, so it's in 4 equal parts, and then pouring red wine on it. For some reason, people present in the church, yes, strangers, would come closer and put their hand on the bread, helping the priest spin it around on top of their fingers while reciting a prayer. In rural areas, you might know the people present in the church, but in the city, that's highly unlikely. Be as it may, those people would wish you well, so that action from their side is never frowned upon. And I don't really think anyone actually eats that bread anyway, given that the priest and the head of the house kiss it at least 3 times and a bunch of people touched it with their bare hands. Maybe people take a bite or two from the middle, as it's supposedly good to do so. There are a few things we do differently nowadays, however. I've only ever heard of na slavu se ne poziva, meaning you should never invite people to your slava. It was implied that people just knew what the your slava was, since you likely mentioned it in casual conversation before. Contradictory to that, I came across this custom that said the household sends out a child with a kondir jug, probably containing rakia or wine, and in some places tiny pieces of bread. The child would go to a neighbor's house, pour them a drink, and invite them to Slava. If the child brought tiny pieces of bread, they had to give one to each household member. If there was no child, young person, to send out, that family would borrow a child from another house. This wasn't unusual. People would often borrow neighborhood boys and girls to help out around Slava. This child would be sent out the day before Slava, before supper, as they were not supposed to be out when it's dark, or the day of Slava, but before 10 a.m. Up until recently, people used to celebrate Slava for 3 whole days. During this time, the gate was left wide open and would be closed when the household decided to stop receiving guests, towards the end of the third day. This might have something to do with the saying Svakog gosta 3 dana dosta. Many people today celebrate only one day, but it's still not shocking to see or hear someone celebrate for 2 or 3 days. Some of my friends told me day 1 is for kumovi and family, day 2 is for friends, and day 3 is for neighbors. That's how their families celebrate. The question of whether you bring gifts is also up in the air. In general, it's considered rude to come to someone's house empty handed, so most people bring wine, cookies, sweets, snacks, or even homemade dishes. Centuries ago, there seem to have existed many rules varying from town to town. Some thought you should never bring gifts to a slava, as that would be like looking down on the host's ability to prepare food for all guests. Some say you should definitely bring some food, as there's a lot of people who drop by and there should be enough food for everyone. Some say that you should bring food if you drop by on day 2 as well. Some say you bring food if you come with your whole family, but not when coming alone. And so on. Countless options. If you're going to a slava for the first time, I'd say ask the host, but they might tell you not to bring anything, as that's the polite thing to do. No one would ask for gifts, but it's always safe to bring at least something. Remember the small candle holder bread baba? Well, traditionally, that bread would be broken into pieces at the end of day 3, and a piece given to everyone whose slava would be soon. The rest of the bread would be crushed and fed to animals. Guests who received the piece also fed it to their animals. They say that only grandmas and grandpas could eat that bread if they really wanted, for whatever reason, but younger people absolutely could not. Since converting to Christianity, kisi bread was replaced with rito, cooked then ground wheat grain mixed with sugar and walnut. It's also brought to the church, drenched in red wine, and it holds the candle. Guests kissing the baba was replaced with guests taking a spoonful of rito and a sip of wine. After you wish srečna slava to each household member, shake their hand, and kiss them on the cheek 3 times, you might feel confused seeing a tray with rito, dessert spoons, and a glass of water. Cross yourself 3 times, pick up a clean spoon, take a spoonful of rito, then put the spoon inside the glass of water. Do not drink that water, no matter how tempting it looks after you bit into the sweet rito. It's there so rito doesn't dry out on the used spoons. Some hosts leave 1 glass of wine that all guests take a sip out of, and more normal people pour a sip worth of wine into tiny glasses they hand out to each guest. Be like the latter. Fun fact: in some places, women used to not shake hands or kiss anyone, only their husbands would. Can we bring that back, please? Since many traits of ancient Slavic gods were translated into Christian saints, people basically just picked their own saint to celebrate and placed their icona on the east wall where the wooden cross is. Slava is also called Krsno ime, as some people chose their family saint based on their own name. If the guy was called Marko, his family saint would be Saint Mark from then on. Today, Slava represents a ceremonial showing of gratitude for the family saint's protection, while remembering and celebrating your ancestors as well. Although some people see Slava as an opportunity to just eat a lot. At the end of your visit, the hostess would often pack up some food to go before you leave, especially if one of your household members was unable to come. This was probably something they did centuries ago, as your journey back home took quite a long time and having food on the road was always welcome. If you receive food in a container, you should wash it and give it back filled with food you made. Never empty. The majority of Serbian people celebrate St. George, St. John, and St. Nicholas. The November to January part of the year is also commonly referred to as Slava season. One last thing to add, there is also Zavetine, or village Slava. Some villages were so small that families didn't even celebrate Slava individually, but together. Churches were built in centers of bigger villages and everyone would gather on that day. They would choose a kolachar beforehand and everyone would send some flour to that person's house. Kolachar would be tasked with baking a kolach out of all that flour and bringing it to the village center. After the priest recited a prayer, they'd break the bread and split it among everyone present. Some villages even pitched in to buy a lamb that would be roasted and eaten during the celebrations.